This rose is for you, little one. The vampire king later learned who gave his quiet son hope again. The single white rose lay on the windowsill of the abandoned wing, placed there by hands the security cameras never captured. And when the vampire king's mute son clutched it to his chest for the first time in 3 years of silence, Adrian Thorne knew that someone had breached the most secure fortress in the supernatural world, and had done so not to kill, but to comfort a child everyone else had given up on. Wait, before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. Adrian stood in the doorway of his son's room, watching the boy, 7 years old in appearance, though he'd been that age for over a decade, rock back and forth on his bed. The white rose pressed against his lips as if breathing in its scent could somehow fill the emptiness that had consumed him since his mother's death. The child hadn't spoken since that night, hadn't cried, hadn't laughed, hadn't made a single sound. The royal physicians called it traumatic mutism. Adrian called it his greatest failure as a father. But someone had gotten through. Someone had found Thomas in this forgotten tower room where Adrian had moved him after the boy's screaming nightmares had driven half the court away in the first year. Someone had left a gift that made Thomas's gray eyes light up for the first time in what felt like forever. "Who brought you this?" Adrian asked softly, knowing he wouldn't get an answer, but asking anyway, as he always did. Thomas just held the rose tighter, and Adrian felt something crack in his chest. He was the vampire king of the Northern Territories, commanded legions of immortals, had lived for 5 centuries and conquered kingdoms. But he couldn't reach his own son. He'd tried everything: therapists, both human and supernatural, healers who claimed they could cure any ailment of mind or body, witches who offered potions and spells. Nothing worked. Thomas remained locked in his silent world, and Adrian could do nothing but watch him fade further away with each passing month. The rose was fresh, its petals perfect, its stem thornless. Someone had prepared it specifically for a child's hands, and someone had placed it here, in the most secure room of the most guarded castle in the territories, without triggering a single alarm or being seen by a single guard. Adrian pulled out his phone and called his head of security. "Marcus, my son's room, now." While he waited, Adrian studied the rose more carefully. It was real, not magical. He would have sensed any enchantment. Just a simple white rose, probably from a garden, given with what seemed like genuine kindness. That worried him more than any threat. Threats he understood. Kindness toward his son, from an unknown source, was a variable he couldn't control. Marcus arrived within minutes, a former Special Forces soldier turned vampire who ran Adrian's security with military precision. He took one look at the rose and his jaw tightened. "When did this appear?" "Sometime in the last hour. Thomas was at his tutoring session until 4 o'clock. When I brought him back to his room at 4:30, the rose was here." "That's impossible. We have cameras covering every approach to this wing. We have guards at every entrance. We have—" And yet, Adrian gestured to the rose. "Check everything. Every camera rotation, every possible entry point. Someone was here, Marcus. Someone who clearly knows this castle better than we do." Marcus nodded and spoke into his radio, dispatching teams. Adrian turned back to his son, who was watching them with those solemn gray eyes, the rose still clutched protectively. "Thomas," Adrian said, crouching down to the boy's level. "The person who gave you this rose, did you see them?" Thomas shook his head. Did you hear them? Another shake. Was the rose here when you came back? A nod. Adrian sighed. So, the intruder had come and gone during the tutoring session, which meant a window of exactly 90 minutes. Still, 90 minutes should have been nowhere near enough time to penetrate their defenses, leave a gift, and escape undetected. Unless the intruder was already inside. Unless they'd been here all along. The thought sent a chill through Adrian, despite his vampire nature. If someone had infiltrated his household, his staff, his inner circle, and he hadn't noticed, then everything he thought he knew about his security was wrong. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus's investigation yielded nothing. No camera footage showed anyone approaching Thomas's room. No guards reported anything unusual. No doors or windows showed signs of forced entry. The rose had simply appeared, as if by magic. Except Adrian's witches confirmed there was no magical signature anywhere in the room. It's like they're a ghost, Marcus said, frustration evident in his voice. I've never seen anything like this. Even the best operatives leave some trace, but there's nothing. Then we're not looking in the right places, Adrian said. Tomorrow, I want guards inside Thomas's room. Invisible to him, but present. If this person returns, we'll be ready. And if they don't return, they will. Adrian looked out the window toward the tower where Thomas slept. Because whatever their purpose is, they've only just started. People don't go to this much effort for a single rose. He was right. The next afternoon, when Thomas returned from his art therapy session, there was another rose on his windowsill. For the boy who paints beautiful things. Thomas's art therapy was the only activity he showed any interest in. He would paint for hours, abstract swirls of color that his therapist insisted represented his internal emotional landscape. Adrian found them heartbreaking, all those dark blues and grays with occasional bursts of red like wounds. But attached to the rose was also a small watercolor painting, clearly done by an amateur but with genuine care. It showed a garden full of roses in every color, and in the center, a small figure of a boy standing among them. Thomas held the painting like it was made of spun glass, his fingers trembling, and for a moment, Adrian thought he might speak. His son's lips moved, forming silent words, but no sound emerged. Still, it was more expression than Adrian had seen from him in years. And the guards hidden in the room hadn't seen a thing. "This is impossible," Marcus said later, reviewing the footage again. "We had 4 vampires stationed in the room, in the corners, invisible to human sight. They report they never saw anyone enter. The rose and painting simply appeared on the windowsill at approximately 3:15, while Thomas was still in his therapy session. Were the guards actually watching the windowsill? They say they were watching everything. But, Marcus trailed off. But they all report feeling strangely drowsy around 3 o'clock. Not enough to fall asleep. We're vampires, we don't get drowsy. But a heaviness, like their attention was being pulled elsewhere. By the time they refocused, the items were there." Adrian leaned back in his chair, thinking, magic? The witches say no. Whatever this is, it's not any supernatural power they recognize. Then we're dealing with someone very skilled, someone who understands our nature well enough to exploit it. Adrian stood, pacing to the window. Increase the guard presence. I want 8 vampires in that room tomorrow, all of them focused on the windowsill specifically. And I want Ilara to place protective wards that alert us to any physical presence, magical or otherwise. But even 8 guards and the most powerful witch in his court couldn't stop the 3rd rose from appearing. This one was red, and it came with a small stuffed rabbit, worn and clearly loved, with a note that read, Friends come in all shapes. This one protected me when I was small. Thomas slept with the rabbit that night. Adrian watched through the surveillance cameras as his son curled around the toy, the rose carefully placed in a cup of water on the nightstand, and something in Adrian's heart both broke and mended at the sight. Someone was reaching his child. Someone was doing what he, with all his power and resources, had failed to do. And he still had no idea who. The pattern continued. Every day, a new rose and a new gift. A book of fairy tales with beautiful illustrations. A music box that played a gentle lullaby. A collection of smooth river stones that felt pleasant to hold. A small telescope for looking at stars. Each gift was thoughtful, appropriate for a child, and seemingly chosen with specific knowledge of Thomas's likes and needs. And Thomas was changing, not speaking yet, but present in a way he hadn't been before. He started arranging the roses in his room, creating little displays. He carried the rabbit everywhere. He looked at the fairy tale book for hours, his fingers tracing the pictures. He was engaging with the world again, bit by tiny bit. Adrian should have been grateful. Part of him was, but mostly he was terrified because he couldn't protect his son from a threat he couldn't see or understand. And until he knew the intruder's true purpose, every gift could be a prelude to something darker. On the seventh day, Adrian decided to take a different approach. Instead of trying to catch the intruder, he would speak to them directly. He wrote a note and placed it on Thomas's windowsill before his son's morning routine. "You've shown my son kindness when the world had none to offer. For that, you have my gratitude. But I need to know who you are and what you want. Meet me in the rose garden at midnight tonight. Come unarmed and unafraid. I give you my word that no harm will come to you." He signed it with his seal and left it there, weighted down with a stone so it wouldn't blow away. That afternoon, there was a new rose, yellow this time, and a response. "I want nothing but to see him smile. But I understand a father's need to know. I will come, but only if you promise to listen with an open heart. Some stories are harder to believe than others." Midnight found Adrian in the rose garden, the autumn wind carrying the scent of late-blooming flowers. The garden had been Elena's, Thomas's mother, and Adrian rarely came here anymore. Too many memories of her laugh, her smile, her hands gentle among the flowers. She died protecting Thomas from a vampire hunter who'd breached their home, and Adrian hadn't been there to save her. It was his greatest regret, eclipsed only by his inability to reach their traumatized son afterward. He stood among the roses she'd planted, waiting, every sense alert. Marcus and a dozen guards were positioned around the garden's perimeter, ready to respond if needed. But Adrian had given his word, and he would honor it unless given reason not to. At exactly midnight, he felt a presence. Not approaching, suddenly there, as if they'd materialized from nothing. Adrian spun toward it and froze. It was a young woman, perhaps 20 in appearance, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid and wearing a plain dress that looked like another century. But it was her eyes that caught him. Gray eyes, the exact shade of Thomas, and filled with a familiar sadness. "Hello, Adrian," she said softly. "Thank you for not having your guards shoot me the moment I arrived. Who are you?" "My name is Clara, and before you ask why I've been leaving gifts for your son, I should probably explain that I'm not exactly alive in the traditional sense." She smiled wanly. "I'm a ghost, or a spirit, or whatever you want to call someone who died but didn't quite manage to move on." Adrian stared at her. Ghosts were rare in the supernatural world, and most were barely sentient echoes of their former selves. But Clara seemed fully present, aware, articulate. "You're dead." Very. I died in 1847 in this very garden, among these roses. Well, not these exact roses. Elena replanted everything. But the garden has always been here, and so have I. Clara moved closer, her form becoming slightly more transparent in the moonlight. I've been here for over a century and a half, Adrian. I watched you build this fortress, watched you fall in love with Elena, watched her plant these roses, and I watched the night she died protecting Thomas. Adrian's hands clenched into fists. You were there? I'm always here. I can't leave the garden. I'm bound to this place by the circumstances of my death. Clara's expression softened. I watched that hunter break in through the garden entrance. I tried to warn her. I can make roses move sometimes if I focus hard enough. But I wasn't fast enough. And, Elena, she trailed off. I'm sorry. I know my condolences mean nothing now, but I am sorry. If you were there, if you could move roses, why didn't you stop the hunter? Because I can only affect the roses, and only slightly. I have no power over living beings. I'm barely here at all. Most people can't see me or hear me. Elena could, sometimes, when she sat in the garden in the quiet hours. We talked a few times. She knew I was here. Adrian felt dizzy. Elena had never mentioned a ghost. But then Elena had kept many things to herself, always protecting others, even at cost to herself. And Thomas? Can he see you? No, not yet anyway. Children sometimes can as they get older, but he's still too young and too traumatized. That's why I've been leaving physical objects, the roses from this garden, gifts from people who pass through and leave things behind. I collect them, the small items that fall from pockets or get dropped and forgotten. It's not much, but it's all I can offer. Why? Why go to such effort for a child you can't even speak to? Clara's eyes filled with ghostly tears. Because I know what it's like to be 7 years old and lose your mother. I know the silence that follows that kind of loss, the way the world stops making sense, the way you retreat into yourself because it's the only safe place left. She took a breath she didn't need. I was 7 when my mother died. My father brought me to live in this castle. He was the groundskeeper then. And I was so lost, so broken, that I stopped speaking too. Adrian's mind raced, putting pieces together. How did you die? I fell from the tower. The same tower where Thomas lives now. Clara's smile was sad. I climbed up there to be alone, to be away from the world that had become too loud and too painful. And I slipped. It was an accident, but also, I think part of me wanted to fall. Part of me was ready to stop fighting. And you've been here ever since? Trapped in the place of my death, unable to move on, unable to truly exist. It's a lonely way to be, Adrian. I watch the world change around me, watch people live and love and die, and I can't touch any of it. The only things I can interact with are the roses, because they were here when I died, because their roots are as bound to this ground as I am. Adrian moved closer to her, studying her transparent form. She looked solid enough, real enough, but there was an otherworldly quality to her that marked her as separate from the living. Why reveal yourself now? You could have continued anonymously. Because Thomas deserves to know someone sees him, someone understands what he's going through, and because you deserve to know that your son isn't alone, even when you can't reach him. Clara met his gaze steadily. I've watched you try everything to help him, Adrian. Every therapist, every healer, every desperate attempt to bring him back. And I've watched you blame yourself when nothing worked. But some wounds can't be healed by others. They can only be survived, day by day, until slowly they become scars we can live with. He's a child. He shouldn't have to just survive. No, he shouldn't, but he does. And sometimes survival is enough. Sometimes it's everything. Clara gestured around the garden. I leave him roses because they're beautiful and because they grow from darkness. I leave him gifts because someone did the same for me once, a housemaid who noticed I wasn't speaking and left little treasures by my bedside. She couldn't fix me, but she reminded me that the world still held kindness, and eventually that was enough to make me want to speak again. But you died before. Before I could fully heal, yes. Before I could truly live again. But I had 2 months of slowly coming back to myself, 2 months where I felt less alone. And those months mattered, Adrian. They mattered so much that even in death, even as a ghost, I remember them as the most important of my entire life. Adrian felt something shift in his chest. He'd been so focused on fixing Thomas, on erasing the trauma, on returning him to the happy child he'd been before Elena's death. But maybe that wasn't possible. Maybe Thomas would never be that child again. Maybe he would be someone different, someone shaped by loss, but not destroyed by it. "What do you want from me?" he asked. Permission to keep visiting, permission to keep leaving roses and gifts, and Clara hesitated. Permission to tell him the truth when he's ready. I think it would help him to know he's not alone in his silence. To know that someone else survived it, even if imperfectly. Adrian considered. Every instinct as a father and a king told him to be cautious, to protect his son from variables he couldn't control. But his instincts had failed him before. They'd failed to predict the hunter's attack, failed to reach Thomas afterward, failed to see that sometimes the solution came from unexpected sources. "You can continue," he said finally, "but with conditions. I want to be able to contact you if needed. I want regular reports on Thomas's progress, and I want the right to revoke this permission at any time if I believe it's no longer in my son's best interest." Clara nodded. "Fair enough. I'll leave notes in the garden when there's something to report. And as for contacting me, just come here and call my name. I'll hear you wherever I am in the garden. One more thing. The way you've been evading my guards and cameras, how?" She smiled. "I'm a ghost, Adrian. I don't exist in the physical world the way your cameras do. I move through walls, through wards, through every barrier you've erected, because none of them are designed to stop something that's already dead. Your guards felt drowsy because I was drawing their attention away, not with magic, but with the simple weight of a presence they couldn't quite perceive. It made them look elsewhere without knowing why. That's disturbing. That's useful. Think about it. I can go anywhere in this castle undetected. I can watch over Thomas in ways your guards never could. I can be an invisible protector if you'll let me." Adrian wasn't sure how he felt about having a ghost watching his son, but Clara had a point. She'd already proven she could bypass every security measure. Better to have her as an ally than an unknown variable. "Why didn't Elena tell me about you? She thought you'd worry, try to exorcise me or bind me or lock down the garden." "She wanted to protect both of us, me from your fear, you from feeling inadequate because there was something in your home you couldn't control." Clara's expression grew gentle. "Elena loved you very much, Adrian. She never doubted you, even when you doubted yourself. She'd want you to know that." The words hit harder than Adrian expected. He turned away, ostensibly to look at the roses, but really to hide the emotion on his face. "I should have been there that night." "Yes, but you weren't, and that's something you'll carry forever. The question is whether you'll let it drown you, or whether you'll use it to become the father Thomas needs now, not the father you wish you'd been then. You're very wise for someone who died at 7. I was 7 when I died, but I've been 7 for over 150 years. That gives you time to think." Clara moved closer, her ghostly form barely disturbing the air. "Let me help your son, Adrian. Let me be the friend he needs while he finds his way back to speech. And maybe in helping him, I'll finally find whatever it is I need to move on. You're very wise for someone who died at 7. I was 7 when I died, but I've been 7 for over 150 years. That gives you time to think. Clara moved closer, her ghostly form barely disturbing the air. Let me help your son, Adrian. Let me be the friend he needs while he finds his way back to speech. And maybe in helping him, I'll finally find whatever it is I need to move on. Adrian turned back to her. You want to move on? I don't know. Part of me does. I'm tired of being trapped, of watching life without living it. But part of me is afraid. I've been here so long that I don't know who I'd be anywhere else. Maybe helping Thomas is my purpose. Maybe once he's healed, I'll be free to go. And if he's never fully healed, then I'll stay. I've been lonely for a century and a half. What's a few more decades if they're spent with purpose? Clara smiled. Besides, I like the boy. He has kind eyes, like his mother. They talked for another hour, Adrian asking questions, Clara answering with patience and surprising insight. She told him about the castle's history, about the people who'd lived and died within its walls, about the changes she'd witnessed over her long existence. She told him about Elena's visits to the garden, their quiet conversations, the way his wife had mourned for a ghost child she couldn't save. She planted white roses for me, Clara said, gesturing to a section of the garden, said they represented innocence and remembrance. She tended them herself, even though she had gardeners who could have done it. She said it felt right to honor a child who'd had so little life. Adrian looked at the white roses, seeing them with new understanding. So much about Elena he hadn't known, so many kindnesses she'd performed in silence. I miss her. I know. So does Thomas, in ways he can't express. But you're both still here, Adrian, still alive, still capable of healing. Don't waste that gift. When Adrian finally returns to the castle, dawn was breaking. He went to Thomas's room, where his son was just waking, and sat on the edge of the bed. The collection of roses sat in various cups and vases around the room, creating a garden of their own. Thomas, Adrian said softly, I met the person who's been bringing you roses. Her name is Clara, and she's a ghost who lives in the garden. She wanted me to tell you that she understands what you're going through, because she went through something similar when she was your age. Thomas sat up, his gray eyes wide and curious. He pointed to his throat, then to the roses, a question clear on his face. Yes, she stopped speaking too when her mother died, and someone left her small gifts to remind her that the world could still be kind. She's doing the same for you now. Adrian reached out, hesitating, then gently touched his son's cheek. You don't have to speak before you're ready, Thomas, but I want you to know that when you are ready, I'll be here to listen, always. Thomas's lower lip trembled. Then, slowly, he reached out and took his father's hand, squeezing it with small fingers. It was the first voluntary touch he'd initiated since Elena's death, and Adrian had to blink back tears. I love you, son. No matter how long it takes, no matter what happens, I love you. Thomas squeezed his hand again, and that was enough. Over the following weeks, Adrian watched his son's gradual transformation. Clara continued leaving roses, always white, pink, red, or yellow, never dark colors that might remind Thomas of sadness. She left books and toys and small notes that Adrian would read aloud to his son. And slowly, so slowly, Thomas began to respond. He started arranging the roses in patterns, creating designs that pleased him. He began playing with the toys instead of just holding them. He looked at his father with less distance in his eyes. And one evening, 3 weeks after Adrian had met Clara, Thomas laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than a breath, prompted by a silly face Adrian made while reading a fairy tale. But it was unmistakably a laugh, and both father and son froze in surprise before Adrian pulled Thomas into a fierce hug, tears streaming down his face. "There you are," he whispered. "There's my boy." Thomas hugged him back, and Adrian felt the walls between them crumbling, bit by bit. Adrian started visiting the garden regularly, calling for Clara, learning about his wife through the ghost's memories. He learned that Elena had doubted herself too, had worried she wasn't a good enough mother, had struggled with the weight of being a vampire queen's consort. He learned that she'd been kind to everyone, even to a ghost who died centuries before she was born. He learned that she'd known about his insecurities and loved him despite them, or perhaps because of them, because they made him try harder, care deeper, love more fiercely. "She wanted you to know," Clara told him one night, "that being a good father doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up, day after day, even when you don't know what to do. You've been doing that, Adrian. She'd be proud. I wish I could tell her I'm sorry. For not being there, for not protecting her, for she knows. And she forgave you before there was even anything to forgive." Elena understood that life, even immortal life, is unpredictable. She didn't blame you. You need to stop blaming yourself. It wasn't that simple, of course. Grief and guilt rarely were. But Adrian tried, for Thomas' sake, if not his own. He spent more time with his son, less time hiding behind work and royal duties. He read stories and played games, and simply sat in comfortable silence when words weren't needed. And Thomas continued to improve. 2 months after the first rose appeared, he spoke his first word since his mother's death. "Papa." Just that. Just one word, whispered so softly Adrian almost missed it. But it was a beginning, and Adrian held his son and cried and thanked Clara in his heart for giving them this chance. 6 months later, Thomas was speaking in full sentences, though still quietly, still carefully. He talked about his mother sometimes, sharing memories Adrian had thought lost forever. He talked about the roses, and the gifts, and the friend he couldn't see but knew was there. And he talked about wanting to see the garden where the roses came from. Adrian brought him to the garden on a sunny afternoon, holding his hand as Thomas walked among the flowers with wide eyes. They stopped at the white roses, and Adrian told Thomas about Clara, about the little girl who died here and stayed behind as a ghost. "Can I meet her?" Thomas asked, his voice small but clear. "I don't know if you can see her yet, but you can talk to her, and she'll hear you." Thomas nodded, solemnly, then walked to the white roses and knelt beside them. "Miss Clara, I'm Thomas. Thank you for the roses. They're really beautiful. And thank you for the rabbit. I named him Peter, and he sleeps with me every night. Papa says you understand about missing your mama, and that makes me feel less alone. I still miss my mama a lot, but the roses help." Everything you gave me helps. Adrian watched his son, this brave, damaged, healing child, and felt something settle in his soul. They would be all right. Not today, maybe not for years, but eventually. They would survive this, and they would do it together. A white rose, seemingly of its own accord, bent toward Thomas until it touched his hand. The boy gasped in delight, gently cupping the flower. "Did you do that?" "I did." Clara's voice audible to both of them for the first time. Adrian turned and saw her materializing beside the white roses, her ghostly form more solid than he'd ever seen it. She was looking at Thomas with such tenderness that Adrian's heart ached. "Hello, Thomas. I'm so glad to finally talk to you properly." Thomas stared at her, his eyes huge. "You're really a ghost?" "I really am. A friendly one, I promise." "You don't look scary. You look nice, like a big sister." Clara smiled, and for a moment she almost looked alive. "I'd be honored to be like a big sister to you, if you'd like that." "I'd like that very much." Thomas hesitated. Does it hurt, being a ghost? Sometimes. It's lonely. But it hurts less now that I have you to visit. You can visit whenever you want. Papa said so. I know. Your father is a good man, Thomas. Even when he's scared or sad, he tries his best for you. That's what love looks like. Thomas turned to Adrian, his small face serious. I love you too, Papa. Even when I couldn't talk, I loved you. I just couldn't say it. Adrian knelt beside his son, pulling him close. I know, Thomas. I always knew. They stayed in the garden for hours, the vampire king and his healing son, and the ghost who'd brought them back together. Clara told them stories about the castle's history, about the people she'd watched over the years, about Elena's visits and her dreams for the garden. Thomas listened raptly, asking questions, laughing at the funny parts, holding Adrian's hand through the sad ones. When evening came and Thomas was yawning, Adrian carried him back to the castle, tucking him into bed with Peter the rabbit and the latest rose, a yellow one that Clara said represented friendship and joy. Papa? Thomas murmured sleepily. Can we visit Clara again tomorrow? Of course, whenever you want. Good. I think she's lonely, and Mama would want us to keep her company. Adrian kissed his son's forehead. Your Mama would be so proud of you, Thomas. You're brave and kind, just like her. And like you, Papa. Clara says you're brave too, even when you're scared. Being scared doesn't make you less brave. It makes you human. But you're not human. You're a vampire. Adrian smiled. Then it makes me real. And being real is what matters most. Thomas's eyes drifted closed, his breathing evening out. Adrian sat beside him until he was fully asleep, then returned to the garden one last time. Clara was waiting by the white roses, her form dimmer now, as if the effort of appearing to Thomas had tired her. Thank you, Adrian said, for all of this, for my son's smile, for his voice, for giving us back what I thought we'd lost forever. You never lost it. It was just hidden for a while, waiting until he felt safe enough to show it again. Clara looked up at the stars. I've been dead for over 150 years, Adrian. I've watched generations come and go, watched love bloom and fade, watched children grow into adults who forgot the magic they once believed in. But I've never felt as purposeful as I have these past months, helping Thomas heal. You've done more than help him heal. You've healed something in me too, the belief that I failed him, that I wasn't enough. You showed me that sometimes being enough means accepting help, accepting that we can't do everything alone. Elena knew that. She was never afraid to be vulnerable, to ask for help when she needed it. That's one of the things I admired most about her. I wish I'd known her as well as you did. You knew her in ways I never could. You were her love, her partner, her choice. I was just a ghost she was kind to. There's a difference. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the night settling around them. Finally, Clara spoke again. I think I understand now why I've been trapped here all this time. I think I was waiting for Thomas, or someone like him. Someone who needed to know that survival is possible, that silence doesn't have to be forever, that loss doesn't define us. Are you saying you can move on now? I'm saying I might be able to, eventually, when Thomas is strong enough that he doesn't need me anymore, when I'm sure he'll be all right. She smiled at Adrian. But that's not today. Today, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Then stay. Stay as long as you need, as long as Thomas needs. You're part of this family now, Clara. Ghost or not, you're one of us. Her eyes filled with ghostly tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. Months became years. Thomas grew. Not physically, frozen as he was at 7 years old in body if not mind, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He became the boy he was meant to be. Thoughtful, creative, compassionate. He painted pictures inspired by Clara's stories, wrote little poems about the roses, spent hours in the garden talking with his ghostly friend about everything and nothing. And Adrian learned to be the father Thomas needed, present, patient, open to healing in all its forms. He stopped trying to fix everything and started simply being there, offering love without expectation, support without strings attached. Clara remained in the garden, as transparent as ever, but somehow more present too. She watched Thomas grow, guided him through his continued healing, and served as a bridge between the boy and the mother had lost. "Do you think Mama can see me?" Thomas asked one day, lying in the grass among the white roses, his head in Clara's ghostly lap. He was 10 years old now in mind, 13 years into his eternal childhood, and sometimes he asked deep questions that had no easy answers. Clara ran ghostly fingers through his hair, the touch barely perceptible but comforting nonetheless. "I think she can. I think she watches over you from wherever she is, proud of the boy you've become. Do you think she's proud of Papa, too? I know she is. He's learned so much, changed so much. He's become the father he always wanted to be. Because of you. You taught him how." "No, sweetheart. I just reminded him that he already knew. Sometimes we need someone outside our pain to show us that we're stronger than we think." Thomas was quiet for a while, watching clouds drift across the sky. Then, "Clara, do you think you'll ever leave? Move on to wherever ghosts go when they're done being ghosts?" "Probably. Someday, when I'm sure you're strong enough that you don't need me anymore. I'll always need you. You're my friend. And I'll always be your friend, even if I'm not here in the garden. But Thomas, you're becoming so strong, so capable. Soon you won't need a ghost watching over you. You'll be ready to face the world on your own terms. I'm not ready yet, I know, and I'll stay until you are. That's a promise." Thomas sat up, turning to look at her with those solemn gray eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "When I'm ready, when you do have to go, will you tell me goodbye? Will you let me say goodbye properly?" Clara's form wavered with emotion. "Yes, I won't disappear without warning. When the time comes, we'll say goodbye properly, and you'll know that I'm going somewhere better, somewhere I can finally rest. Okay, then I'll try to be ready. Not now, but someday, because you deserve to rest, Clara. You've been tired for such a long time." She pulled him close, and though her embrace was barely physical, it was no less real. "Thank you for understanding. You have such a kind heart, Thomas. Never lose that." Adrian, watching from a distance, felt his own heart swell with pride and love. His son had grown so much, had learned empathy and compassion in ways that many immortals never did. And Clara had been instrumental in that growth, shaping Thomas not just into a survivor of trauma, but into someone capable of recognizing others' pain and responding with grace. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Adrian returned to the garden. "Clara, I need to talk to you." She appeared almost instantly, materializing beside her white roses. "Is something wrong?" "No. Everything is right, actually. That's what I want to talk about." Adrian moved closer. "Thomas is healing, really healing, not just surviving. And it's because of you, because of the roses and the gifts and the friendship you've given him. I can never repay that debt. There's no debt. This was a gift, freely given. Nevertheless, I want to offer you something, a choice." Adrian took a breath. "My witches have been researching ways to help you move on. They found rituals, ceremonies that might break the binding that keeps you here. If you want, we can try them. We can try to set you free." Clara's expression was complicated, hope and fear and uncertainty all mingled together. "And if I'm not ready? Then we don't do it. There's no pressure, Clara, but I thought you should know the option exists. That when you're ready, whenever that might be, we can help you take that final step. What about Thomas? What will he do without me? He'll grieve, he'll miss you, but he'll understand because he's learned that loving someone sometimes means letting them go. You taught him that in all the stories you've told about his mother. Adrian smiled gently. And he'll be all right. We both will be. You've given us the tools we need to heal. Now it's time for you to heal too. Clara looked around the garden, at the roses shed tended in her ghostly way for over a century and a half, at the castle where she'd spent her entire existence, living and dead. I've been here so long, I don't know how to be anywhere else. None of us know how to be anywhere we've never been. That's what makes it an adventure. I'm scared, I know, but you're also ready, whether you feel like you are or not, and Thomas will support you, just as you've supported him. We both will. She was quiet for a long time, her ghostly form flickering with indecision. Finally, she spoke. Can I think about it? Can I have time to prepare, to say proper goodbyes? Take all the time you need. Days, months, years. It doesn't matter. This is your choice, Clara. It always has been. 3 months later, Clara came to Adrian in the garden. I'm ready, or as ready as I'll ever be. I've said my goodbyes to Thomas, explained why I need to go, and he's handling it better than I expected. He's strong. You made him that way. We made him that way, together. Clara smiled, and for the first time since her death, it was a smile without shadows. When should we do it? Tomorrow night, under the full moon. The witches say that's when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when the ritual will be most effective. Tomorrow night, then. Clara looked around the garden one last time. Will you do something for me, after I'm gone? Anything. Plant a new rosebush, a white one, for innocence and remembrance. Not for me, for Thomas and his mother and everyone who's ever been lost too young. A reminder that beauty can grow from grief, that life continues even after death. I'll plant it myself, and I'll make sure Thomas helps. The next evening, the garden was filled with candles, their flames flickering in the gentle breeze. Adrian's witches had drawn symbols on the ground, created circles within circles, prepared everything needed for the ritual. Thomas stood beside his father, holding his hand tightly, trying to be brave, even though tears streamed down his face. Clara appeared at the center of the ritual space, her form more solid than Adrian had ever seen it, almost alive in the candlelight. She looked at each of them in turn. Adrian, Thomas, the witches who'd worked so hard to find this solution, and her gratitude was palpable. Thank you, she said simply, for seeing me, for befriending me, for making my long existence finally mean something. Thank you, Thomas choked out, for the roses, for everything. I love you, Clara. I love you too, little one. Be brave, be kind, and remember that silence is sometimes okay. You don't always have to have words. Sometimes presence is enough. Clara turned to Adrian. Take care of him, and take care of yourself. You're a better man than you believe, Adrian Thorne. You taught me that. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. Safe journey, Clara. May you find the peace you've been seeking for so long. The head witch began chanting, ancient words in a language older than the castle itself. The other witches joined in, their voices harmonizing, creating something that was part song, part prayer, part command to the universe itself. Clara's form began to glow, softly at first, then brighter, until she was almost too bright to look at. But Thomas didn't look away, and neither did Adrian. They watched as the light grew and grew, as Clara's ghostly form became pure radiance, as the binding that had held her to this place for over a century and a half finally broke. "Goodbye," Clara's voice echoed, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Thank you for setting me free." And then she was gone. The light vanished, the candles guttered out, and the garden was just a garden again. Beautiful, peaceful, but empty of its ghostly guardian. Thomas buried his face in Adrian's side, sobbing, and Adrian held him close, his own tears falling into his son's hair. They grieved together for the friend they'd lost, for the ghost who'd saved them both, for the kindness that had changed their lives forever. But even as they grieved, Adrian felt something else: gratitude. Clara had been trapped for so long, and now she was free. She'd fulfilled her purpose, helped them heal, and earned her rest. It was sad, but it was also right. "Papa?" Thomas asked eventually, his voice muffled against Adrian's shirt. "Do you think she's happy, wherever she is?" "I think she's finally at peace, and yes, I think she's happy." "Good. That's what I wanted for her, even though I miss her already." "We'll always miss her, but we'll honor her memory by living the lives she helped us rebuild. We'll be brave and kind, just like she asked, and we'll never forget the ghost who loved us enough to stay and loved us enough to leave." The next day, Adrian and Thomas planted the white rosebush Clara had requested, right at the center of the garden where she'd spent so much of her existence. They tended it together, father and son, watering it and talking to it as if Clara could still hear them. And maybe she could. Maybe somewhere, in whatever comes after, she was watching and smiling, proud of the family she'd helped heal, the boy she'd helped save, the father she'd helped guide. The rosebush grew strong and beautiful, blooming every season with perfect white flowers. And whenever Thomas felt sad or lost or alone, he would come to the garden, sit beside Clara's rose, and remember that he was loved by his father, by the mother who still watched over him, and by the ghost who'd given him hope when the world had none to offer. Years passed. Thomas eventually began aging again, his eternal childhood broken by some unknown magic that even Adrian's witches couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the healing itself, the emotional growth finally manifesting physically. Perhaps it was Clara's final gift, releasing him from the stasis that had frozen him at 7. Thomas grew into a young man, then a man proper, kind and thoughtful and creative, everything Clara had seen in him and helped nurture. He became an artist, painting roses in every color, writing stories about ghosts and healing and the power of small kindnesses. His work touched thousands, helped countless others who'd suffered trauma, gave hope to those who thought healing impossible. And through it all, he remembered the ghost who'd started it with a single white rose on a windowsill. He told her story, honored her memory, made sure that Clara's century and a half of loneliness had meant something, had changed the world in ways she never could have imagined. Adrian watched his son flourish, watched him become the man Elena would have been so proud of, and knew that every struggle, every moment of despair, every prayer for help had led to this. Clara had been the answer to those prayers, the unexpected savior in a situation that seemed hopeless. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full and the roses were in bloom, Adrian thought he could feel her presence in the garden. Not trapped anymore, not bound, but visiting by choice, checking on the family she'd helped save. He would whisper his thanks to the night air, to the memory of a ghost who'd given them everything, and he would tend the white roses that grew in her honor. Because some gifts are too precious to ever forget. Some kindnesses echo through generations, and some ghosts, even after they've moved on, remain in the hearts of those they've touched, eternal and beloved and never truly gone. Thomas was 30 years old, looking remarkably like his father now, when he brought his own child to the garden for the first time, A daughter, born of a union with a witch who'd captured his heart with her kindness and creativity. This is Mama's garden, Thomas told his daughter, Elena, named for the grandmother she'd never meet. And this is Clara's rose, planted for a ghost who saved Papa when he was just a little boy. Little Elena touched the white petals gently. Her gray eyes, 3 generations of the same eyes, wide with wonder. "Tell me the story, Papa." And Thomas did, sitting in the grass with his daughter in his lap, telling her about the roses that appeared on windowsills, the gifts left by invisible hands, the ghost who'd understood silence and had taught him to speak again. Adrian watched from the castle window, his grandson playing at his feet, and felt a peace he'd never expected to find. His family was whole, was happy, was healing across generations. And it had all started with a ghost's compassion and a single white rose. "Thank you, Clara," he whispered to the evening air, "for everything. Rest well, knowing your story lives on and your kindness echoes through time." And in the garden, a white rose turned toward the castle, bending in a breeze that wasn't there, as if in answer. As if to say, "You're welcome. I love you all, and I'm always watching."